Okay, so the video that should be playing in the background should be me finishing off the third and final level for my final project video game called Heading for the Hills. This has probably been one of the more stressful levels to design because basically the actual designing process didn't take me long. I came up with the idea for the level within like 30 seconds, and I planned it out within half an hour. Compared to the other levels where I had to especially compared to level 2, because level 1 was along a similar vein to level 3 with how quickly I came up with the idea. Based on it being World War One, I was like, well, somewhere there has to be a trench, somewhere there has to be a home base, or something like that. Level 2 was probably the hardest to come up with, solely based on I just didn't know how I could get from point A to point B without just doing A, B, C kind of deal, if that makes sense. But the actual creating process, the actual drawing process, coding process for all of the levels, the hardest one was most likely and most definitely level 3 because, well, once you're back at your home base, there isn't much threat unless the home base is under attack. Or unless you're going to tell me that they laid hundreds of landmines outside of their own base just to blow up their own troops, which wouldn't make sense at all. So you have to have the home base under attack, and then that throws a lot of problems in. The development process was stressful as hell, because I just kept flipping, basically, on the idea. Every time I did, like, almost every single thing that I drawed, or created, or placed, or coded for the final level, had the ideas changed almost all the time. Every single thing I did, I always then sat back, looked at it after I'd finished coding it, or placing it down, or whatever. I would sit back and look at it and go, there is a way I could do this better, but if I go with my new idea, I'll have to recreate the whole of level 3. Hence why it took me the longest. But it is done now. As you can see, the final level could be better, but it is basically you've finally been able to make it back to your home base after surviving running from the failed attack on the enemy's position. But unfortunately, you didn't make it back in time, and as you can see, the enemy are now leading a retaliation strike upon your home base, and there's already a lot of dead soldiers and destroyed mechs because the majority of the force, or the majority of the army you were a part of, were involved in that original attack. But, well, as you see while playing through the game, most of them are dead, and the ones that aren't dead are fighting back as best as they can. But you can probably assume that by the time you get to the home base, you're probably, if not definitely, the last one left from the original assault on the enemy position. And there are quite a lot of vehicles, but there's also not a lot of people left in the base. A small enough force to man the base was left behind in defense. Not big enough to man every single vehicle, evidently why most of the armoured vehicles that are being used in defense are tanks and not the mechs, because based on my thinking, I would believe that the tanks probably don't take up as much crew as the mechanized walkers do, because I feel like it's a lot more complex to move a mechanized vehicle with legs than it is to move something that has wheels. So, with that, there's a lot of fires, a lot of dead, a lot of troops that are just firing. Now, if you sit around in the level for long enough, you will realize that no one actually dies, because I actually the troops aren't shooting at one another. That all of the fights that are happening throughout the level are all like a tile off from one another, because I just couldn't really come up with an idea of how to make it look like a realistic battle without it just being like, okay, you lot do damage to one another, and then you have everyone has a health bar. Once the health bar is emptied, you turn into a dead version of yourself. Bing bong bash. Because that could result in, if a player takes too long, everyone's dead, and then it's just like, well, what's the point of going back to the home base anymore if everyone's died? Or it would take the threat out of the level if just the if the defense force just destroys the enemy, the retaliation strike from the enemy. If it gets destroyed within the first 30 seconds of the level, the threat would get wiped out. Hence why they're not actually shooting at one another. It's just supposed to simulate such a chaotic battle that there is gunfire coming from all different directions, there's explosions everywhere, there's landmines everywhere, it's really hard to traverse, there's fires everywhere because it's an intense battle. It's supposed to be a chaotic scene because it is a last stand to defend the home base, and you can't do anything about it because you are out of ammunition. That is the whole point. You are running from the enemy from your attack on the enemy trench because you are out of ammo. Most of the soldiers and armor that was used in that attack was absolutely obliterated, as you see while running through the other levels. So there is nothing you can do except for survive. I've made the third level very hard. It is quite a timing based level. So I hope this works out well. I think it will. This does mean though that the third level is technically most likely the hardest, because at least in the first level the gunfire is coming from behind you, so you can just hide. Not in this level; it's coming from multiple directions.